What happens when a decorated war hero becomes the target of the very system she swore to protect? When Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Matthews returned from her third tour in Afghanistan, she never imagined that the greatest battle of her life would be fought not on foreign soil, but on the streets of her own hometown. In 30 minutes, a routine traffic stop would expose a web of corruption so deep that it would reach the highest levels of law enforcement, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. This is the story of how one woman's courage to stand up against injustice would bring down an entire corrupt network that had been operating in plain sight for years. Sarah Matthews adjusted her rearview mirror as she pulled into the parking lot of the local community centre. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and she could already see families gathering for the veteran support group meeting she was scheduled to lead. At 35, Sarah had earned her stripes the hard way. 3 tours in Afghanistan, a Purple Heart, and the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Army Reserve had taught her the meaning of service, sacrifice, and standing up for what's right. She grabbed her briefcase from the passenger seat, checking her watch. 5 minutes early. Just the way she liked it. Sarah had been running the support group for 6 months now, ever since she'd moved back to Millbrook, the small Ohio town where she'd grown up. Coming home hadn't been easy. The nightmares still came sometimes, and the transition from military life to civilian life was harder than anyone who hadn't lived it could understand. But helping other veterans navigate their own journeys back to civilian life gave her purpose. As she walked toward the building, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her younger brother Marcus, a detective with the local police department. "Proud of you, sis. Keep making a difference." The message made her smile. Marcus had always been her biggest supporter, even when their parents had questioned her decision to join the military instead of going straight to college. The meeting went well. 12 veterans showed up, including 2 new faces that Sarah was particularly pleased to see. Building trust took time, but slowly, this group was becoming a real support network. Tom Rodriguez, a Marine veteran struggling with PTSD, had finally opened up about his panic attacks. Jennifer Chen, a Navy veteran dealing with the challenges of being a female veteran in a male-dominated field, had shared her story of workplace discrimination. As the meeting wrapped up and people began to leave, Sarah felt that familiar sense of accomplishment. This was what service looked like in civilian life, helping others, building community, making a difference one person at a time. It was nearly 8 o'clock when Sarah finally locked up the community centre and walked to her car. The parking lot was mostly empty now, with just a few streetlights casting pools of yellow light across the asphalt. She was thinking about dinner, maybe calling her brother to catch up, when she noticed the police cruiser in her rearview mirror as she pulled out of the parking lot. Sarah didn't think much of it at first. Millbrook was a small town, and it wasn't unusual to see police cars around. She signaled her turn onto Main Street, heading toward her apartment on the other side of town. The cruiser followed. When she stopped at the red light at the intersection of Main and Oak, she glanced in her mirror again. The officer in the car behind her was talking on his radio. The light turned green, and Sarah proceeded through the intersection, maintaining the speed limit. The cruiser stayed behind her. 2 blocks later, when she turned onto Elm Street, the red and blue lights suddenly lit up the night sky behind her. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but she remained calm. She was a law-abiding citizen with a clean driving record. She checked her speedometer. She'd been going exactly 25 miles per hour in the 25 zone. Her registration and insurance were current, her license was valid, and her car was in perfect condition. There was no reason for this stop, but she pulled over to the curb and put her car in park. The officer approached her window, and Sarah rolled it down. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit she'd developed after years of training other soldiers on how to interact safely with local law enforcement during deployment. "License and registration," the officer said without preamble. Sarah noticed his nameplate read Officer Davidson. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a crew cut and a stern expression that seemed forced. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Sarah asked politely, reaching slowly for her purse. "Just give me your license and registration," Davidson repeated, his tone more aggressive now. Sarah complied, handing over her documents. Officer Davidson took them back to his car, where Sarah could see him talking on his radio again. She waited patiently, checking the time on her phone. It was now 8:15. After what felt like an unusually long time, Davidson returned to her window. "Step out of the car," he ordered. "I'm sorry, what's the reason for this stop?" Sarah asked again, genuinely confused. "Step out of the car now," Davidson said, his hand moving to his utility belt. Sarah's military training kicked in. She recognized aggressive body language and escalating behavior when she saw it. Something was wrong here, but she also knew that arguing with a police officer on the street wasn't going to help anything. She slowly opened a car door and stepped out. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Davidson commanded. "Officer, I think there's been some kind of mistake," Sarah said, complying with his instructions. "I wasn't speeding. My car is properly registered and insured. And I haven't done anything wrong."
"I'll decide what you've done wrong," Davidson snapped back.
As Sarah placed her hands on the roof of her car, another police cruiser pulled up. Officer Janet Mills stepped out, and Sarah felt a brief moment of relief. Mills was older, probably in her 40s, and Sarah hoped she might be more reasonable. "What do we have here?" Mills asked Davidson. "Suspicious vehicle, suspicious behavior." Davidson replied, "I think we should search the car." Sarah turned around slowly. "Officers, there's nothing suspicious about my behavior or my vehicle. I was leaving a veteran support group meeting at the community center. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Matthews, Army Reserve, and I live here in Millbrook. There's absolutely no reason to search my car." Mills looked at Sarah for a long moment, and Sarah thought she saw something flicker across the older officer's face. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. But then Mills's expression hardened. "Actually, we've had reports of drug activity in this area," Mills said. "And your behavior tonight fits the profile of someone involved in illegal activity." Sarah felt her temper rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What profile would that be, Officer Mills? Are you questioning our authority?" Davidson stepped closer to Sarah, invading her personal space. "I'm asking for clarification on why I'm being treated like a criminal when I've done absolutely nothing wrong," Sarah replied evenly. "That's what they all say," Davidson muttered. And Sarah caught the edge of something in his voice, something that made her stomach tighten with recognition. She'd heard that tone before, directed at soldiers under her command, who happened to be minorities. She had thought this kind of blatant bias was becoming less common in law enforcement, but apparently she'd been wrong. "I'd like to call my brother," Sarah said. "He's Detective Marcus Matthews with the Millbrook Police Department." Davidson and Mills exchanged a quick glance. "You can call whoever you want after we're finished here," Mills said. "Right now, we're conducting a lawful traffic stop and investigation."
"Investigation of what exactly?"
Sarah asked. Instead of answering, Davidson moved to her car and began looking through the windows with his flashlight. "Mills, come look at this," he called. Mills joined him at the passenger side of the car. "What is it?" "Looks like drug paraphernalia to me," Davidson said loudly enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah knew there was nothing illegal in her car. The most suspicious thing in there was probably an empty coffee cup and some paperwork from the veteran support group. But she also knew that if these officers wanted to find something, or if they wanted to plant something, there wasn't much she could do to stop them right now. "I'm going to need you to open the car," Mills said, returning to where Sarah stood. "Do you have a warrant?" Sarah asked. "We don't need a warrant if we have probable cause," Davidson said with a smirk. "What probable cause?" Sarah demanded. "The suspicious items visible in your vehicle," Mills replied. Sarah knew this was a lie, but she also knew that fighting it here, on the street, would only make things worse. "I want to see what you're claiming to see," she said. Davidson opened the passenger door of her car and pointed his flashlight at the floor. "Right there," he said. "White powdery substance in a small baggie." Sarah leaned forward to look, and her blood ran cold. There, on the floor of her passenger side, was indeed a small plastic baggie with white powder in it. A baggie that had definitely not been there when she'd gotten out of her car. "That's not mine," Sarah said immediately. "I've never seen that before in my life." "Right," Davidson said sarcastically. "That's what they all say." Sarah's mind was racing. Someone had planted drugs in her car. These officers had planted drugs in her car. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or overzealous policing. This was deliberate. This was corruption. "I demand to speak to your supervisor," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You'll have plenty of time to talk to whoever you want from a jail cell," Mills replied, pulling out her handcuffs. "Sarah Matthews, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance," Davidson announced, seeming to enjoy every word. As Mills cuffed her hands behind her back, Sarah's military training took over. She catalogued every detail, the time, the exact location, the badge numbers of both officers, the fact that Davidson had been the one to discover the planted evidence. She memorized the patrol car numbers and noted that neither officer had activated a body camera, despite department policy. "This is a setup," Sarah said as they led her toward the patrol car, "and I'm going to prove it." Davidson laughed. "Good luck with that from prison." As Sarah was placed in the back of the patrol car, she caught sight of her reflection in the window, She looked like any other criminal being arrested. But she knew the truth. She was a decorated veteran, a community leader, a woman who had served her country with honor and distinction. And now she was being framed by the very people who were supposed to protect and serve. The ride to the police station was silent, except for the crackling of the radio. Sarah used the time to think, to plan, to prepare for what was coming next. She had been trained to survive in much worse situations than this. She had been trained to gather intelligence, to analyze threats, and to develop strategies under pressure. These corrupt officers had no idea who they were dealing with. When they arrived at the station, Sarah was processed like any other arrestee. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal items confiscated. Through it all, she remained calm and cooperative, answering questions when required, but volunteering nothing extra. She asked repeatedly to call her brother, but was told she'd have to wait. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Sarah was finally allowed her phone call. She dialed Marcus's number from memory. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I'm at the police station. I've been arrested on false charges, and I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Arrested for what?" "Drug possession." "Marcus, they planted evidence in my car. This is a setup." Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah, that's a very serious accusation. Are you sure about this?" "I'm absolutely certain." "I need you to come down here right now. And Marcus, be careful who you trust." Sarah hung up the phone and was led to a holding cell. As she sat on the hard bench, staring at the concrete walls around her, she thought about all the veterans she'd served with who had come home to face discrimination and injustice. She thought about the support group she'd led just hours earlier, and how she'd told them that their service mattered, that they had value, that the system would protect them if they did the right thing. Now she was learning firsthand how wrong she'd been. But if these corrupt officers thought they had picked an easy target, they were about to discover their mistake. Sarah Matthews had not survived 3 tours in a war zone and earned the rank of lieutenant colonel by backing down from a fight. And this fight was just getting started. Outside the holding cell, she could hear voices in the hallway. One of them sounded like her brother Marcus. Sarah closed her eyes and prepared herself for what was coming next. She had been trained for this moment her entire military career. The moment when everything you believed about right and wrong, about justice and truth, was put to the ultimate test. The clock on the wall showed 10:30 p.m. In less than 3 hours, Sarah's life had been turned upside down. But she was far from defeated. In fact, she was just getting started. Detective Marcus Matthews stood in the hallway outside the holding cells, his mind reeling from what his sister had just told him. In his 8 years with the Millbrook Police Department, he had never heard Sarah tell a lie, not once. She was the most honest, straightforward person he knew. If she said evidence had been planted in her car, then evidence had been planted in her car. But the implications of that were staggering. It meant that at least 2 of his fellow officers were corrupt. It meant that the department he had served faithfully for nearly a decade had a serious problem. And it meant that his sister was in real danger. Marcus walked to the front desk where Sergeant Patricia Wong was processing paperwork. Patricia had been with the department for 15 years and was one of the most respected officers on the force. If anyone could be trusted, it would be her. "Pat, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Marcus said quietly. Patricia looked up from her paperwork. "What's going on, Marcus? You look like you've seen a ghost. My sister was just brought in on drug possession charges. She says the evidence was planted." Patricia's expression grew serious. "Marcus, that's a hell of an accusation. You sure about this?" "I'm sure my sister doesn't lie, and I'm sure she doesn't do drugs." "Pat, something's not right here. Who brought her in?" "Davidson and Mills," Patricia replied after checking her computer. "They reported finding cocaine in her vehicle during a routine traffic stop." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Officer Davidson had only been with the department for 18 months, but in that time, Marcus had heard whispers. Nothing concrete, nothing he could prove, but whispers nonetheless. Stories about Davidson being too aggressive during stops, complaints from citizens that had been quietly dismissed, rumors about his connections to some unsavory characters in town. Mills was more surprising. She had been with the department for 12 years and had always seemed professional, if somewhat aloof. But Marcus realized that in recent months she had started partnering with Davidson regularly, which was unusual since she typically worked alone. "Pat, I need to ask you something else, and this stays between us for now. Have you heard anything about Davidson?"
"Any rumors, any complaints, anything at all?" Patricia glanced around to make sure no one else was listening.
Marcus, you know I don't like to spread gossip about fellow officers. This isn't gossip.
This is about my sister's life and possibly about the integrity of this entire department. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and lowered her voice. There have been some things. Citizens complaining about Davidson being too aggressive, but those complaints keep getting buried. And there's been talk about him spending money he shouldn't have. New car, expensive clothes, stuff like that. But Marcus, you can't go making accusations without proof. I understand that. But if my sister is right, then we have a much bigger problem than one corrupt officer. Before Patricia could respond, Lieutenant David Chen warped into the station. Chen was the shift supervisor and had been Marcus's mentor when he first joined the department. If anyone could help navigate this situation, it would be him. Chen, can I talk to you privately? Marcus asked. Lieutenant Chen nodded and gestured towards his office. Once they were inside with the door closed, Marcus explained the situation. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. Marcus, if what you're suggesting is true, this is a career-ending accusation for everyone involved, including you if you handle it wrong, Chen said when Marcus finished. But if your sister is right, then we have a duty to investigate this properly. What do you suggest? First, we need to secure all evidence related to the arrest. I want that baggie tested immediately, and I want it tested by the state lab, not our local facility. Second, I want to review any video footage from the area where the arrest took place. Third, I want to interview your sister formally, and I want it recorded. Chen paused, thinking. And fourth, I want you to step back from this investigation. I know she's your sister, but you're too close to this. I'll handle it personally. Marcus understood the logic, but every instinct told him that his sister needed an advocate right now. Chen, with all due respect, I trust you completely, but I don't know who else I can trust. If Davidson and Nils are corrupt, who else might be involved? It was a sobering question. Chen had been thinking the same thing. In a department of only 32 officers, corruption could spread quickly, especially if it involved officers who had been there for years like Mills. You're right to be concerned, Chen admitted. But that's exactly why we need to handle this by the book. Any mistakes, any appearance of impropriety, and the whole case gets thrown out. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Sergeant Wong stuck her head in. Lieutenant, I think you need to see this. Chen and Marcus followed Patricia back to her desk, where she had pulled up footage from a traffic camera at the intersection of Main and Oak, the same intersection where Sarah had been stopped. I was thinking about what Marcus said, so I pulled up the traffic cam footage from tonight, Patricia explained. Look at this. On the screen, they could see Sarah's car approaching the intersection at exactly 8:07 p.m. Behind her was Davidson's patrol car. The timestamp showed Sarah's car coming to a complete stop at the red light. Davidson's car pulled up behind her. Then, clearly visible on the screen, Davidson got out of his car and approached Sarah's vehicle. Wait, Marcus said. This was before he activated his emergency lights. Why would he approach her car during a normal traffic stop? Chen leaned forward, studying the footage. Keep playing it. On screen, Davidson could be seen at the passenger side of Sarah's car for approximately 30 seconds. Then he returned to his patrol car, and immediately after that, his emergency lights activated. Son of a bitch, Chen muttered. He planted the evidence before he even officially stopped her.
Patricia rewound the footage and played it again.
This is clear evidence of misconduct. Davidson approached her vehicle while she was stopped at a traffic light, before there was any justification for a traffic stop. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that his sister was telling the truth, and anger that his fellow officers had tried to frame her. We need to get her out of that cell right now. Not yet, Chen said firmly. If we move too fast, we'll tip off Davidson and Mills, and they'll have time to cover their tracks. We need to build a solid case before we make any moves. Chen turned to Patricia. I want you to make copies of this footage and store them securely. Then I want you to check if there are any other cameras that might have captured the arrest itself. Already on it, Patricia replied. There's a security camera at the gas station on Elm Street that might have caught something. While Patricia worked on gathering additional footage, Chen called the state crime lab. This is Lieutenant Chen with Millbrook PD. I have evidence in a drug possession case that needs to be fast-tracked for analysis, and I need it done completely outside normal channels. After explaining the situation to the lab supervisor, Chen hung up and turned to Marcus. Marcus was pacing now, his frustration evident. Chen, While we're building a case, my sister is sitting in a jail cell. She's a decorated veteran who has never even gotten a speeding ticket, and she's being treated like a common criminal. I understand your frustration, Marcus. But if we handle this wrong, not only will your sister not get justice, but Davidson and Mills will get away with it and probably do it to someone else. Chen's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then hung up with a concerned expression. That was Captain Rodriguez. He heard about the arrest and wants to see all the paperwork first thing in the morning. Marcus felt a chill. Captain Rodriguez had been with the department for over 20 years. If he was involved in the corruption, then Sarah was in even more danger than they'd thought. Do we trust Rodriguez? Marcus asked. Chen considered the question carefully. I've never had reason not to. But given what we're dealing with, I think we need to proceed as if we can't trust anyone until proven otherwise. Patricia returned to where they were standing. I've got more footage, she announced. The gas station camera shows the actual arrest. You need to see this. They gathered around Patricia's computer screen as she pulled up the new footage. The angle was different, but it clearly showed Davidson and Mills's patrol cars, Sarah's vehicle, and all three individuals involved in the arrest. Look here. Patricia pointed to the screen. This is when Davidson claims to discover the drugs in Sarah's car. On the footage, they could see Davidson opening the passenger door of Sarah's car and shining his flashlight inside. But from this angle, it was clear that he was placing something on the floor of the car, not discovering something that was already there. This is unbelievable, Marcus said. They're clearly planting evidence, and they're doing it like they don't care if anyone sees them. That suggests they've done this before, Chen observed, and that they've never been challenged on it. Patricia pulled up another screen on her computer. I ran a search on recent arrests by Davidson and Mills. In the past 6 months, they've made 14 drug possession arrests together. That's unusually high for a town this size. Chen studied the numbers. 14 arrests in 6 months. And I'm willing to bet that most of those cases involved minority suspects or people who wouldn't have the resources to fight back effectively. My sister isn't going to be their typical victim, Marcus said grimly. She's got military training, she knows how to fight, and she's not going to back down. Which is probably why they picked her, Chen replied. Think about it. A black woman veteran, living alone, new to town. They probably thought she'd be easy to intimidate and that no one would believe her if she complained. Patricia shook her head in disgust. How long do you think this has been going on? Let's find out, Chen said. Patricia, I want you to pull the files on all 14 of those arrests. I want to see if there are any patterns, any similarities in the circumstances. While Patricia began pulling files, Chen turned to Marcus. I need you to go home and act normal. Don't let on that we know anything. Tomorrow morning you come in for your regular shift and keep your eyes and ears open. If Davidson and Mills suspect we're investigating them, they could destroy evidence or worse. What about Sarah? She'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. By then, we should have the lab results back on that baggie. If it shows Davidson's fingerprints, we'll have grounds to dismiss all charges and start building a case against him and Mills. Marcus understood the logic, but leaving his sister in jail overnight felt wrong. Chen, what if something happens to her while she's in there? I'll make sure she's safe, Chen promised. I'll put her in a single cell and make sure the guards know to check on her regularly. As Marcus reluctantly prepared to leave, Patricia called them back to her computer. Guys, you need to see this. I pulled the arrest files for Davidson and Mills, and there's a pattern. On her screen was a spreadsheet showing the 14 arrests. The pattern was immediately obvious. All of the suspects were minorities. All of the arrests had occurred in the same general area of town. And in every case, the drugs had been discovered in plain sight in the suspect's vehicle. This isn't random crime fighting, Chen said. This is systematic targeting. But why? Marcus asked. What do they get out of this? Chen thought for a moment. Drug arrests mean overtime pay for court appearances. They mean commendations and positive performance reviews. And if they're working with drug dealers, they could be getting kickbacks for eliminating competition. Patricia pulled up another file. Look at this. 3 of these arrestees had their charges dropped due to procedural errors, but they all pled guilty to lesser charges and paid fines. They're running a shakedown operation, Marcus realized. Arrest people on false charges, then offer them a deal to plead to lesser charges and pay fines. The people are so scared of going to prison that they take the deal, even though they're innocent. And the ones who don't take the deal probably get railroaded through the system, Chen added. This is organized crime with badges. The implications were staggering, Not only were Davidson and Mills corrupt, but they were running a systematic operation to target innocent people and extort money from them. And they had been doing it for months, possibly years, with complete impunity. "We need to contact the FBI," Chen said finally. "This is beyond what we can handle internally." "Do we trust the FBI?" Marcus asked. "More than we trust our own department right now," Chen replied grimly. As the three of them worked late into the night, gathering evidence and building their case, Sarah remained in her holding cell, unaware of the investigation taking place on her behalf. But she wasn't idle. Using skills learned during her military intelligence training, she was carefully observing everything around her, cataloging details, and preparing for the fight of her life. Sarah had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. In Afghanistan, she had known who the enemy was. Here, the enemy wore the same uniform as the good guys, and telling them apart was becoming increasingly difficult. But Sarah Matthews had not survived 3 tours of duty by giving up when things got tough, and she wasn't about to start now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would rest, she would plan, and she would prepare for battle. Because that's exactly what this had become, a battle for justice, for truth, and for the very soul of the community she had come home to serve. At 6:47 a.m., Lieutenant Chen's phone rang with a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Man, Jennifer Walsh from the State Crime Lab. "Lieutenant Chen, I have the results on that evidence you sent over last night. You're going to want to hear this immediately." Chen had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing case files with Patricia Wong. They had discovered that Davidson and Mills's corruption went far deeper than they had initially suspected. What started as a case against 2 corrupt officers was rapidly becoming something much larger. "Go ahead, Dr. Walsh. The baggie contains cocaine, but here's what's interesting. There are 3 sets of fingerprints on it. One set belongs to Officer Davidson, which is consistent with your theory, but the other 2 sets are more concerning." Chen felt his stomach tighten. "Who are the other 2? One set belongs to Anthony Vega, a known drug dealer who was arrested 3 months ago. The other set belongs to Captain Rodriguez." The phone felt heavy in Chen's hand. Captain Rodriguez, the man who was supposed to review Sarah's case this morning, was directly involved in the corruption. This wasn't just about 2 bad cops. This was about a systematic operation that reached into the highest levels of the Millbrook Police Department. "Dr. Walsh, I need you to keep this information completely confidential for now. Don't share these results with anyone else." "Understood, Lieutenant. But you should know, I've also run additional tests on the cocaine itself. It's unusually pure. Street-level drugs are typically cut with other substances. This cocaine is pharmaceutical grade, which suggests it came from a seizure or evidence room." After hanging up, Chen immediately called Patricia and Marcus, arranging to meet them at a coffee shop across town, far from the police station. When the 3 of them gathered an hour later, Chen shared the lab results. The implications hit them all immediately. "Rodriguez is in on it," Marcus said, stating what they were all thinking. "Which means we can't trust anyone in the department." Patricia had brought additional files with her. "It gets worse," she said, spreading papers across the table. "I spent the night going through old evidence logs. Over the past year, several bags of seized cocaine have been checked out of the evidence room and never returned. Guess who signed them out?" Chen looked at the signatures. "Chen!" Captain Rodriguez's name appeared multiple times. "They're using seized drugs to plant evidence on innocent people," Patricia continued. "But here's the really scary part. I found records of similar checkouts going back 3 years. This operation has been running for a long time." Marcus was studying another set of papers. "Look at this pattern. Every time drugs are checked out of evidence, there's a corresponding arrest by Davidson and Mills within a few days. They've made dozens of false arrests. The scope of the corruption was staggering. This wasn't just about Sarah's arrest. It was about a systematic operation that had been targeting innocent people for years, destroying lives and careers while enriching the corrupt officers involved. "We need federal help," Chen said. "This is beyond what we can handle locally." "Do we know anyone at the FBI?" Patricia asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. My sister mentioned someone during one of her veterans meetings. Agent Rebecca Torres, she's a former Marine who works out of the Cleveland field office. Sarah said she specializes in public corruption cases." Chen nodded. "Call her. We need someone we can trust, and someone with the authority to take action quickly." While Marcus made the call, Chen and Patricia continued reviewing the evidence they had gathered. The video footage, the lab results, the evidence logs, and the pattern of false arrests painted a clear picture of systematic corruption. But they also revealed something else. Time was running out. Sarah's arraignment is at 10 this morning, Chen said, checking his watch. If Rodriguez is involved, he's going to try to rush this through the system before we can stop it. Marcus finished his call with Agent Torres. She's on her way. She said she can be here in 2 hours, and she's bringing a team with her. 2 hours might be too late, Patricia said. If they arraign Sarah and she's transferred to county jail, it becomes much harder to protect her. Chen made a decision. We need to delay the arraignment. I'm going to call in sick, which will force Rodriguez to handle the preliminary paperwork himself. That should buy us some time. The plan was risky. If Rodriguez suspected they were stalling deliberately, he might accelerate his timeline or, worse, try to silence Sarah permanently. But they didn't have many options. Agent Rebecca Torres arrived at 9:15 a.m. with 2 other federal agents. Torres was in her early 40s, with short dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She listened intently as Chen, Marcus and Patricia laid out their evidence. This is comprehensive work, Torres said when they finished their presentation. You've built a strong case against Davidson and Mills and possibly Rodriguez, but I need to ask, why did you call the FBI instead of handling this internally? Because we don't know how far this corruption spreads, Chen replied. And because Sarah Matthews deserves better than to have her case buried by the same system that framed her. Torres nodded. I've reviewed Lieutenant Colonel Matthews' military record. She's a decorated veteran with an exemplary service record. The idea that she would suddenly start using drugs is absurd. Torres turned to Marcus. Tell me about your sister. What kind of person is she? Marcus thought for a moment. Sarah is the most principled person I know. She joined the military to serve her country, and when she came home she started a veteran support group to help other people. She's never even gotten a speeding ticket. The idea that she would possess drugs is ridiculous. And the community impact of this corruption? Torres asked. Patricia answered. We've identified at least 14 false arrests in the past 6 months alone. Most of the victims were minorities or people without the resources to fight back effectively. They were forced to plead guilty to lesser charges and pay fines even though they were innocent. Torres exchanged glances with her fellow agents. This fits a pattern we've been seeing in several small departments across Ohio. We've suspected there was a larger network involved, but we haven't had enough evidence to prove it. You think this is part of something bigger? Chen asked. I think Rodriguez, Davidson, and Mills are part of a drug trafficking operation that uses police badges as cover. Torres replied. They plant evidence on innocent people to make their arrest numbers look good, while protecting actual drug dealers who pay them off. The federal agents spent the next hour reviewing all the evidence the local officers had gathered. Torres was particularly interested in the video footage and the evidence logs showing drugs being checked out and never returned. This is enough to get arrest warrants, Torres announced. But I want to coordinate this carefully. If we move too fast, evidence could be destroyed, and other conspirators could escape. Torres outlined a plan. Her team would simultaneously arrest Davidson, Mills, and Rodriguez, while other agents secured the evidence room and any computers or files that might contain additional evidence. Local officers who could be trusted would be assigned to protect Sarah and ensure her immediate release. What about other potential victims? Marcus asked. We'll be reviewing every arrest these officers have made over the past 3 years, Torres replied. Anyone who was wrongfully convicted will have their charges dismissed and their records expunged. At exactly 11 a.m., the operation began. Agent Torres and her team, along with Chen and Patricia, arrived at the Millbrook Police Department with arrest warrants. Davidson was at his desk when they approached him. Officer Davidson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights under color of law, Torres announced, producing her badge. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Davidson's face went white, and his hand instinctively moved towards his weapon before he caught himself. Other officers in the bullpen stopped what they were doing and stared. Simultaneously, other agents were arresting Mills and Rodriguez. Captain Rodriguez was in his office when the federal agents entered. Captain, you're under arrest for conspiracy, drug trafficking, and corruption, the lead agent announced. Rodriguez's reaction was different from Davidson's. Instead of shock, his face showed resignation, as if he had been expecting this moment for some time. I want a lawyer, was all he said. While the arrests were taking place, Sarah was being released from her holding cell. Chen personally handled her release paperwork, apologizing for what she had been put through. Lieutenant Colonel Matthews, I owe you a profound apology, Chen said as he walked her out of the building. What happened to you was a complete violation of everything we're supposed to stand for. Sarah's response was measured but firm. "Lieutenant, I appreciate the apology, but what I want is justice. Not just for me, but for everyone else these corrupt officers targeted." Agent Torres met with Sarah privately to discuss her experience and gather her testimony. Sarah's military training had served her well. She had observed and remembered details that would be crucial to building the case against the corrupt officers. "Lieutenant Colonel, your quick thinking and detailed observations are going to help us prosecute not just the officers who arrested you, but potentially a much larger corruption network," Torres explained. Sarah listened as Torres outlined what they had discovered about the scope of the corruption. The systematic targeting of minorities, the planting of evidence, the extortion scheme. It was everything Sarah had suspected and worse.
How many people do you think were affected by this?
Sarah asked. "Based on what we found so far, possibly dozens over the past 3 years. Maybe more," Torres replied. "Your case was the one that finally exposed them, but you weren't their first victim." Sarah felt a mixture of anger and determination. "What can I do to help ensure they're prosecuted to the full extent of the law?" "Your testimony will be crucial," Torres said. "But beyond that, I think you might want to consider getting involved in police reform efforts. Communities need advocates like you, people who understand both service and justice." As the day progressed, more details of the corruption network emerged. The evidence room search revealed that hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of seized drugs had been checked out and never returned. Computer files showed communications between Rodriguez and known drug dealers, suggesting that the corrupt officers were providing protection in exchange for payments. Marcus found Sarah that evening at their parents' house, where she was having dinner and trying to process everything that had happened. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. "I'm angry," she said finally. "I'm angry that this happened. I'm angry that it happened to other people before me. And I'm angry that it probably would have kept happening if I hadn't had the resources to fight back." "But you did fight back," Marcus pointed out. "And because you did, a lot of innocent people are going to get justice." Sarah nodded. "I keep thinking about the veterans in my support group. Some of them have had run-ins with police that they blamed on their PTSD or their own behavior. Now I wonder if they were actually victims of this same corruption." Torres said they're going to review every case, Marcus assured her. "If anyone else was targeted, they'll find out." That night, as Sarah tried to sleep in her own bed for the first time in 2 days, she thought about everything that had changed. 2 days ago, she had been a veteran trying to help other veterans adjust to civilian life. Now she was at the center of a federal investigation that would reshape the entire Millbrook Police Department. But more than that, she was beginning to understand that her real mission, the one that would define the next chapter of her life, was just beginning. The fight for justice didn't end with the arrest of 3 corrupt officers. It extended to reforming the systems that had allowed the corruption to flourish in the first place. Sarah had served her country honorably in Afghanistan. Now she would serve her community by working to ensure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. It was a different kind of battlefield, but it was no less important than any mission she had undertaken in uniform. The corrupt officers had picked the wrong target when they chose Sarah Matthews. They had expected a victim, but they had found a warrior instead. And this warrior was just getting started. 3 weeks after the arrests of Davidson, Mills, and Rodriguez, Agent Rebecca Torres stood in a converted conference room at the Millbrook Police Department that had been transformed into a federal task force command center. Charts covered the walls, showing connections between corrupt officers, drug dealers, and victims. What had started as an investigation into Sarah's false arrest had evolved into something much larger. A multi-state corruption probe that was revealing the true scope of organized crime within law enforcement. Sarah Matthews sat at a table reviewing victim files, her military intelligence background proving invaluable to the investigation. After her release, she had volunteered to help the FBI identify and contact other victims of the corruption network. What she was discovering made her original arrest seem like just the tip of an iceberg. "Agent Torres, you need to see this," Sarah said, looking up from a stack of case files. "I've identified a pattern that goes beyond what we initially suspected." Torres walked over to where Sarah was working. Over the past few weeks, the two women had developed a strong working relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice. "What have you found?" Torres asked. Sarah spread several files across the table. "These are cases from the past, 2 years where Davidson and Mills made arrests, but look at the timing. Every single arrest happened within 48 hours of a major drug seizure in a neighboring county." Torres studied the timeline Sarah had created. The pattern was unmistakable. Major drug busts in surrounding counties were consistently followed by false arrests in Millbrook. They were using legitimate drug seizures from other jurisdictions to supply their evidence planting operation, Torres realized. But that means they had contacts in other police departments. Sarah nodded grimly. It gets worse. I cross-referenced the arrest dates with Rodriguez's phone records that you obtained through the warrant. He made calls to numbers in 3 different counties immediately before each of these arrest waves. Torres felt a chill as the implications became clear. This wasn't just corruption within the Millbrook Police Department. It was a coordinated network spanning multiple jurisdictions. Marcus Matthews entered the command center carrying a box of additional files. In the week since his sister's arrest, he had been working closely with the federal task force, helping to identify other potentially corrupt officers and reviewing old cases. Torres, I've got the files from Greene County that you requested, Marcus said, setting the box down. And you're not going to like what I found. Marcus pulled out several folders. Greene County has had an unusually high number of drug arrests over the past 2 years, almost all involving small amounts of cocaine found in vehicles during traffic stops. Sound familiar? Sarah and Torres exchanged glances. The same pattern they had identified in Millbrook was apparently being repeated in other jurisdictions. How many officers are we talking about? Torres asked. At least 6 in Greene County, 4 in Hamilton County, and 3 in Butler County, Marcus replied. All of them have arrest patterns similar to what we saw with Davidson and Mills. Torres picked up her phone and called FBI headquarters in Cleveland. The investigation was expanding far beyond what anyone had anticipated, and she needed additional resources. While Torres coordinated with headquarters, Sarah continued reviewing victim files. Each case represented a life that had been disrupted or destroyed by false charges. Many of the victims had pled guilty to lesser charges rather than risk prison time, creating criminal records that would follow them forever. One file in particular caught Sarah's attention. Maria Santos, a single mother of 2, had been arrested for drug possession 6 months earlier. According to the police report, cocaine had been found in her purse during a routine traffic stop. Santos had pleaded guilty to avoid jail time and had been placed on probation, but the conviction had cost her job as a nurse. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the number listed in Santos's file. Ms. Santos? This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Matthews. I'm calling about your arrest 6 months ago. I believe you may have been the victim of police misconduct, and I'd like to talk to you about it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I don't understand. I already pled guilty. The case is closed. Miss Santos, I believe the drugs found in your possession were planted there by corrupt police officers. Several officers have been arrested for evidence tampering, and we're reviewing all of their cases. Sarah could hear Santos crying on the other end of the line. I kept telling everyone that those drugs weren't mine, but no one would believe me. I've never used drugs in my life. I couldn't afford a good lawyer, so I just took the plea deal because I was scared of going to prison and leaving my children. Santos, would you be willing to meet with me and the FBI agents investigating this case? We may be able to get your conviction overturned. 2 hours later, Maria Santos sat in the task force command center, sharing her story with Sarah and Agent Torres. Her account was heartbreakingly similar to what had happened to Sarah, a routine traffic stop that escalated into a drug arrest based on planted evidence. They told me I fit the profile of a drug user, Santos explained. I asked what that meant, and they just said I should know. I think they targeted me because I'm Hispanic and I was driving through an upscale neighborhood. Torres took detailed notes as Santos spoke. Ms. Santos, you mentioned that the officer found the drugs in your purse. Did you ever let the purse out of your sight? Yes, actually. They made me get out of the car and put my hands on the roof. My purse was still inside the car. The officer went back to his patrol car for several minutes, then came back and searched my purse. That's when he said he found the cocaine. Sarah recognized the tactic immediately. It was the same thing Davidson had done to her car, approaching the vehicle while the victim was distracted and planting evidence that would be discovered during the official search. As the day progressed, more victims came forward. Each story was similar: routine traffic stops in certain neighborhoods, forced searches of vehicles, and the miraculous discovery of small amounts of cocaine in places where it could easily be planted. By evening, the task force had identified 27 potential victims of the corruption network, and that number was continuing to grow. Agent Torres called a briefing to update everyone on the expanding investigation. The conference room was now crowded with FBI agents, trusted local police officers, prosecutors, and victim advocates. What we initially thought was a localized corruption problem has turned into a multi-state criminal enterprise, Torres began.
We now have evidence of coordinated criminal activity involving police officers in 4 different counties. Torres pointed to a map on the wall showing the locations of all the connected arrests. The pattern suggests a coordinated operation. Drug seizures in one county provide evidence for false arrests in another county. Officers share intelligence about potential targets and coordinate their activities to avoid detection. Sarah raised her hand. Agent Torres, what about the financial aspect? Have you been able to track where the money from this operation was going? Torres nodded. That's one of the most disturbing aspects of what we've discovered. Bank records show that several of the implicated officers have been making regular deposits that far exceed their official salaries. We believe they were being paid by drug dealers to eliminate competition and create the appearance of effective law enforcement. Marcus spoke up. So they were double-dipping, getting paid by the department for false arrests that made their numbers look good, and getting paid by criminals to target specific people or protect certain operations. Exactly, Torres confirmed. And the scope of the operation suggests it's been going on for at least 3 years, possibly longer. Dr. Roy, Jennifer Walsh from the State Crime Lab joined the briefing via video conference to provide an update on the forensic evidence. We've now analyzed evidence from 34 different cases connected to this investigation, she reported. In every single case, the alleged drugs show signs of having been handled by police officers before being discovered during searches. The implications were staggering. Dozens of innocent people had been arrested, convicted, and sentenced based on fabricated evidence. Lives had been destroyed, families separated, and careers ended based on systematic corruption within law enforcement. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her case had been the key that unlocked this investigation, but now she was learning about the true scope of damage that had been done to her community. What happens to the victims now? She asked. Torres turned to the prosecutor who had joined the briefing. That's something we're working on with the district attorney's office. All of the convictions based on planted evidence will be overturned, but that's just the beginning. Many of these people are entitled to compensation for what they've been put through. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Chen, addressed the group. We're also looking at filing federal civil rights charges against all the implicated officers. This wasn't just corruption, it was systematic denial of constitutional rights under color of law. As the briefing concluded, Sarah found herself thinking about the veterans in her support group. Several of them had mentioned negative encounters with police that they had blamed on their own PTSD symptoms or behavior. Now she wondered how many of those encounters had actually been examples of the same corruption she had experienced. That evening, Sarah met with her brother Marcus at a diner outside of town. They needed a place where they could talk privately about everything they had learned. Marcus, I keep thinking about something Agent Torres said, Sarah began. This operation has been going on for at least 3 years. How many people do you think have been affected? Marcus had been thinking about the same thing. If they were making false arrests at the rate we've documented, we could be talking about hundreds of victims, and those are just the ones in our immediate area. Sarah stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I've been wondering if I should have seen this coming. I'm supposed to be trained in intelligence analysis. There were probably signs of this corruption that I missed. Sarah, you couldn't have known, Marcus said firmly. You moved back to town 6 months ago. This network had been operating for years before you got here. If anything, you're the one who finally exposed them. But that's exactly my point, Sarah replied. I was lucky. I had military training, I had you in the department, and I had the knowledge and resources to fight back. Most of their victims didn't have those advantages. Marcus understood what his sister was getting at. You're thinking about the bigger picture, aren't you? About how to prevent this from happening again. Sarah nodded. Agent Torres mentioned that they've seen similar patterns in other small departments across Ohio. This isn't just about Millbrook. It's about systemic problems with police accountability and oversight. As they talked, Sarah began to formulate an idea that would shape the next phase of her life. The corruption network had been exposed and was being dismantled, but that was only the first step. The real work would be preventing similar corruption from taking root elsewhere. Marcus, what if we could create a model for community oversight that could be implemented in other small towns? Something that would make it much harder for this kind of corruption to operate undetected. Marcus considered the idea. You're talking about a complete restructuring of how police departments operate and how they're held accountable. Exactly, Sarah said. And I think my military experience might actually be useful for that. In the military, we have multiple layers of oversight and accountability. Maybe some of those principles could be adapted for civilian law enforcement. As they finished their meal, Sarah felt a sense of purpose beginning to crystallize. Her arrest had been traumatic, but it had also revealed her true mission.
She was going to dedicate herself to ensuring that no other innocent person would go through what she and the other victims had experienced. The corrupt officers had made a critical error when they targeted Sarah Matthews. They had assumed she would be just another victim who would quietly accept injustice rather than fight back. Instead, they had awakened a force for reform that would reshape law enforcement not just in Millbrook, but potentially across the entire region.
The battle for justice was far from over, but Sarah now understood that her role in that battle extended far beyond her own case. She was fighting for every victim of corruption, every person who had been wrongly accused, and every community that deserved better from those sworn to protect and serve them.
6 months after her false arrest, Sarah Matthews stood before a packed courthouse as Judge Margaret Harrison prepared to sentence the final defendant in the police corruption case. The courtroom was filled with victims of the corruption network, their families, community members, and media representatives who had been following the case since the FBI raids. Officer Davidson sat at the defendant's table, his attorney beside him. Over the past months, the scope of the corruption network had been fully revealed through the federal investigation.
Davidson, Mills, and Rodriguez had all been convicted on multiple federal charges including conspiracy, civil rights violations, drug trafficking, and evidence tampering. But Davidson had been identified as the primary operator of the evidence planting scheme, making his sentencing particularly significant. Agent Rebecca Torres, who had led the federal investigation, sat in the gallery behind Sarah. The investigation had ultimately identified 47 victims of the corruption network across 4 counties, with total fraudulent convictions spanning more than 5 years. It had become one of the largest police corruption cases in Ohio's history. Judge Harrison looked out over the crowded courtroom before beginning her remarks.
This case represents one of the most egregious examples of police corruption this court has ever encountered. The defendants violated their oath of office, violated the constitutional rights of dozens of innocent citizens, and betrayed the trust the communities place in law enforcement. Sarah listened as the judge detailed Davidson's crimes. The evidence had been overwhelming. Video footage, fingerprint analysis, phone records, and bank accounts had painted a clear picture of systematic corruption. Davidson had been the operational leader, Mills had been his partner in planting evidence, and Rodriguez had provided protection and access to seized drugs from the evidence room. Mr. Vida. Davidson. Judge Harrison continued. Your actions have not only harmed individual victims, but have damaged the relationship between law enforcement and the community. You have made it harder for honest police officers to do their jobs and have undermined public trust in the justice system. Davidson's attorney had argued for leniency, claiming that his client was a young officer who had been led astray by more experienced colleagues. But the evidence showed that Davidson had been the driving force behind the operation, actively recruiting other officers and expanding the scheme across multiple jurisdictions. For the charges of conspiracy, civil rights violations under color of law, and drug trafficking, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, Judge Harrison announced. A murmur ran through the courtroom. It was a significant sentence, reflecting the serious nature of the crimes and the number of victims involved. After the sentencing, Sarah joined Agent Torres and other victims for a press conference outside the courthouse. As the victim whose arrest had initiated the investigation, Sarah had become a spokesperson for police reform efforts. Today's sentencing represents justice for dozens of victims who were wrongly accused and convicted. Sarah began, addressing the cameras and reporters. But our work is not finished. We must ensure that this kind of systematic corruption cannot happen again in any community. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had become deeply involved in police reform efforts. She had testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger oversight mechanisms, had worked with community groups to develop new accountability standards, and had helped establish a victim support network for others who had been affected by police misconduct. The Millbrook Police Department had undergone a complete transformation. Captain Rodriguez had been replaced by Lieutenant Chen, who had been promoted after his crucial role in exposing the corruption. The department had implemented new policies requiring body cameras for all officers, mandatory psychological evaluations, and civilian oversight of all drug-related arrests. But Sarah's vision extended beyond just reforming the Millbrook Police Department. She had been working with Agent Torres and other law enforcement experts to develop a model that could be implemented in other communities to prevent similar corruption. After the press conference, Sarah met privately with Maria Santos, the single mother whose nursing career had been destroyed by a false drug conviction. Santos's conviction had been overturned, and she was in the process of having her nursing license restored. I wanted to thank you again, Santos said, tears in her eyes. If you hadn't fought back against your arrest, I would still be living with that false conviction on my record. Sarah understood the weight of what Santos was saying. Her decision to resist the false charges hadn't just affected her own case, it had led to justice for dozens of other victims.
Maria, your courage in coming forward and testifying was just as important, Sarah replied.
It takes courage to speak out against corruption, especially when you've already been victimized by the system. Santos was one of the success stories. Her conviction had been overturned, her criminal record expunged, and she was receiving compensation for the wages she had lost. But not all of the victims had been so fortunate. Some had served jail time based on false charges. Others had lost jobs, homes, or custody of their children. The corruption network had left a trail of destroyed lives that would take years to fully address. That evening, Sarah attended a meeting of her veterans support group. The group had grown significantly since her arrest, as word had spread about her work on police reform and victim advocacy. Several veterans who had previously been reluctant to seek help were now participating regularly. Tom Rodriguez, the Marine veteran who had been struggling with PTSD, approached Sarah after the meeting. "Sarah, I wanted to tell you something. Remember I mentioned having a bad encounter with police a few months back? I looked up the date and it was Officer Davidson who stopped me. After hearing about your case, I'm starting to think maybe I wasn't being paranoid after all." Sarah listened carefully as Tom described his encounter. Many of the details matched the pattern of the corruption network: a pretext stop, aggressive behavior, a search that turned up nothing, but left Tom feeling humiliated and traumatized. "Tom, would you be willing to talk to Agent Torres about this? Even if charges aren't filed, your experience could help with the ongoing investigation." Tom nodded. "I've been blaming myself for months, thinking that my PTSD made me overreact to a normal police encounter. Now I'm wondering how many other veterans have been targeted by these same corrupt officers." It was a sobering thought. Veterans, particularly those dealing with PTSD or other service-related issues, were often reluctant to report police misconduct because they blamed themselves or feared that their complaints wouldn't be believed. The next morning, Sarah met with Agent Torres at the Federal Task Force office to discuss the final aspects of the investigation. The prosecutions were complete, but the FBI was still working to identify any additional victims and to prevent similar corruption networks from developing elsewhere. "Sarah, I wanted to update you on the broader investigation," Torres began. "We've now identified similar patterns of corruption in 6 other states. Your case has become the template for investigating and prosecuting these types of networks." Torres pulled out a map showing locations where similar investigations were ongoing. Law enforcement agencies across the country are now looking for the warning signs you helped us identify: unusual arrest patterns, evidence irregularities, and financial discrepancies among officers. Sarah studied the map. The scope was staggering. What had started with her single false arrest had revealed the type of corruption that was apparently occurring nationwide. "Agent Torres, I've been thinking about something. What if we could develop a system that would make this kind of corruption almost impossible to hide? What do you have in mind?" Sarah pulled out a folder containing proposals she had been developing. What if every drug arrest required immediate, independent verification? What if all evidence had to be tested by labs outside the arresting jurisdiction? What if civilian oversight boards had real authority to investigate complaints? Torres reviewed Sarah's proposals with interest.
"These are good ideas, Sarah."
"Some departments are already implementing similar measures as a result of your case. But I think we can go further," Sarah continued. "What if we created a model community policing program that could be replicated in other small towns? Something that emphasizes transparency, accountability, and community engagement." Over the following months, Sarah worked with Torres, community leaders, and reformed police officials to develop what became known as the Millbrook model, a comprehensive approach to community policing that emphasized prevention of corruption through transparency and accountability. The model included several key components: mandatory body cameras for all police interactions, civilian oversight boards with real investigative authority, independent testing of all drug evidence, psychological evaluations for officers, community engagement programs, and protection for whistleblowers within police departments. 1 year after her arrest, Sarah stood before the Millbrook City Council as they voted to formally adopt the new policing model. The vote was unanimous, with strong support from both the police department and the community. "This model represents a new partnership between law enforcement and the community," Sarah addressed the council. "It recognizes that effective policing requires trust, and that trust must be earned through transparency and accountability." Lieutenant Chen,
Now the police chief spoke in support of the reforms. These changes don't make police work harder, they make it better. When officers know they're being held to high standards, when the community trusts the process, and when there are safeguards against corruption, everyone benefits. After the council meeting, Sarah walked through downtown Millbrook, reflecting on everything that had changed since that night when she was falsely arrested. The corrupt officers were in prison. Their victims had received justice and compensation. The police department had been reformed from top to bottom, and a model was being developed that could prevent similar corruption in other communities. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had found her true calling. Her military service had prepared her to serve her country in combat. Her civilian service was preparing her to serve her community in the ongoing battle for justice and accountability. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Torres. "Sarah, I wanted you to know. The Department of Justice is considering implementing the Millbrook model as a pilot program in 12 other communities across the country. Your case has had a national impact." As Sarah read the message, she thought about all the people whose lives had been affected by the corruption network. The victims who had been wrongly convicted, the families who had been separated, the communities that had lost trust in their police departments. Her arrest had been traumatic, but it had also been the catalyst for changes that would protect countless other people from experiencing the same injustice. Sarah Matthews had served her country with honor in Afghanistan. Now she was serving her community with equal dedication in the fight for justice at home. The corrupt officers who had targeted her thinking she would be an easy victim had instead awakened a force for reform that would reshape law enforcement far beyond the small town where it all began.
As she walked home that evening, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction.
The mission was far from complete. There would always be more work to do in the fight against corruption and injustice. But significant progress had been made, and the foundation had been laid for lasting change. The night she was arrested, Sarah had promised herself that she would prove the charges were false. She had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Not only had she cleared her own name, but she had exposed a network of corruption, brought justice to dozens of other victims, and helped create a model for police reform that was being implemented across the country. Sarah Matthews had turned her worst night into her greatest victory, and in doing so, she had made her community, and potentially the entire country, a safer and more just place for everyone. EPI log. 2 years later, Sarah Matthews was invited to speak at the FBI National Academy about police corruption investigations. As she stood before an audience of law enforcement professionals from across the country, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight," she told the audience. "The key to preventing the kind of systematic corruption we uncovered in Millbrook is transparency, accountability, and community engagement. When police departments operate with integrity and openness, when they engage meaningfully with the communities they serve, and when there are real consequences for misconduct, corruption becomes much harder to sustain." The Millbrook model had been successfully implemented in 15 communities across 6 states, with measurable improvements in community trust and reductions in complaints against police. Sarah had been invited to consult on police reform efforts in cities as large as Cleveland and as small as rural communities with fewer than 5,000 residents. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Veterans Administration had asked Sarah to develop a program to help veterans who had been victims of police misconduct. Too many veterans, particularly those dealing with PTSD or other service-related issues, had been targeted by corrupt officers who assumed they would be easy victims. As Sarah concluded her speech at the FBI Academy, she thought about Officer Davidson, who was serving this sentence in federal prison. His corruption had been exposed, his victims had received justice, and the system had been reformed to prevent similar crimes. But the real victory wasn't in Davidson's punishment, it was in the positive changes that had emerged from the investigation. Sarah Matthews had proven that one person, standing up for what is right, can make a difference. Her false arrest had been traumatic, but it had also been the beginning of a journey that would improve the lives of countless others. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in the communities where we live and work. The corrupt officers had made one critical mistake when they chose to target Sarah Matthews. They had expected to find a victim. Instead, they had found a warrior for justice, and that warrior was far from finished fighting.